Hey guys, tonight we're pulling on a freshly starched apron and stepping into the most quietly demanding job in modern history, being a Canadian housewife in the 1950s. Not the version from the cheerful cereal ads, where a woman in pearls floats around a spotless kitchen laughing at gelatin mould. I mean the real one, where the furnace is temperamental, the wringer washer is trying to eat your arm, and 4 children, 1 husband and a casserole are all demanding your attention at the exact same second. A big thank you to whoever suggested tonight's topic, by the way. You lot are the reason this little channel keeps growing, and I read every single idea you send in. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is, because somehow it's always the middle of the night somewhere. And if you'd rather drift off with just your ears, the channel is now on Spotify too, with the link waiting for you down in the description. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, and get comfortable. Ideally somewhere with central heating your grandmother would have openly wept for. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to run an entire household with no Google, no delivery apps, and no group chat to quietly complain in? Did women really wear pearls to vacuum, or was that just Chatelaine magazine lying to an entire nation? How did anyone survive a Manitoba winter with a clothesline as their only dryer? What exactly was in a jellied salad, and why did everyone pretend to enjoy it? Could you plate a full roast dinner while a toddler tried to eat the linoleum and your husband's boss arrived at 6 o'clock sharp? And what happened to the woman who quietly decided she wanted something more than all of this? Well, congratulations, you've just woken up in 1955, somewhere in the freshly poured suburbs of Canada. The coffee percolator is already gurgling, there is frost on the inside of the windows, and someone very small is standing beside the bed calling your name. Good luck. Let's start where every single day starts. Far too early, and not on your terms. There is no alarm clock in this house that matters, because the alarm clock is a small human being who has decided that 4:58 in the morning is a perfectly reasonable time to be awake and emotionally available. You surface from a sleep that was never really sleep, because the baby was up twice and the furnace clanked like a haunted radiator all night. Beside you, your husband is still deeply, peacefully unconscious, because his day begins when he sits down at the table you're about to set. You swing your feet onto a cold floor, feel the specific January bite of a Canadian house that has been quietly losing heat since 2 a.m, and you're already behind. Let's talk about that cold, because it deserves respect. The floor beneath your bare feet is not merely cool, it is aggressively hostile, a slab of chilled wood that seems to draw the warmth straight out through your soles. You reach for a housecoat and slippers, not for style but for survival, the way a diver reaches for a wetsuit. Somewhere down the hall a child is crying, and somewhere closer the baby is escalating from a whimper to a full announcement. There is no snooze button. There has never been a snooze button. The concept of pressing a button to purchase 9 more minutes of sleep would strike you as science fiction, right up there with a telephone you carry in your pocket. You move through the dark house on autopilot, because you have done this 1,000 mornings and will do it 1,000 more. You know which floorboards creak, which stairs are colder, exactly how long the water takes to run warm, which is to say, far too long. Your body aches in the particular way of a woman who lifts children, hauls laundry, and stands on hard floors from dawn until well past dusk. You are, let's say, 30 years old, which in 1955 is a settled, matronly age, a woman with responsibilities rather than a woman with a future full of options. Nobody's asking how you slept. Nobody will ask all day. Consider the sheer unfairness of the arrangement for a moment. Your husband will rise in an hour to a warm kitchen, a hot breakfast and a fresh shirt, none of which appear by magic, all of which appear because you conjured them in the dark while he dreamed. He will call this normal. He will call this home. And in a sense he is right, because this is precisely how the era has decided a home should run, on the invisible, unpaid, uninterrupted labour of the woman who wakes first and sleeps last. It is a machine, and you are the engine, the fuel, and the mechanic all at once. You scoop up the baby, still warm and furious, and pad toward the kitchen to light the stove. The window over the sink wears a delicate fern of frost on the inside of the glass, pretty in the way that dangerous things are pretty. Outside, the street is black and silent, every other house dark, though you know that behind a dozen of those dark windows another woman is also awake, also holding a baby, also staring at the frost. You are alone. You're also somehow in enormous company. And with that comforting little thought, you set down the baby, strike a match, and get to work. Because the day, cruel and relentless, has officially begun. Before you can face the day, you have to assemble yourself, and I mean assemble, like a small industrial procedure. This is not a throw on a hoodie situation. There is the girdle, a garment engineered somewhere between a corset and a medieval torture device, designed to smooth you into the correct silhouette while quietly relocating your organs. There are the stockings, held up by garters, laddering the instant you look at them wrong, and a fresh pair cost real money you don't technically have. Then the dress, the belt, the hair set the night before in curlers you slept on like a bed of tiny plastic grenades, and a swipe of lipstick, because heaven forbid the milkman catch you looking like a woman who was up all night with a baby. Let's linger on the girdle, because it is the foundation of the entire architectural project that is your body today. You step into it, or rather you wrestle into it, tugging the elastic and rubber contraption up over your hips with the grim determination of someone launching a sail in high wind. Once it is on, you can breathe, technically, in the way a sausage can technically breathe. It flattens, it lifts, it holds everything in a smooth ladylike line that the magazines insist is essential. Comfort was never a design consideration. If you have ever spent a full day in shapewear 2 sizes too small, congratulations, you have sampled a mild afternoon of 1950s womanhood. Then come the stockings, and here is where patience goes to die. These are sheer nylons, gossamer thin, and they snag on a rough fingernail, a wooden chair, a passing thought. You roll each one carefully up your leg, clip it to the garter belt, and pray. A run in your last good pair is a genuine small tragedy, a budget problem and a dignity problem rolled into one, because a lady does not appear in laddered stockings, and a lady certainly does not go bare-legged. It's a bit like being told to keep an expensive silk scarf pristine while doing manual labour all day. Good luck. Now, the hair. Last night, exhausted, you rolled it onto curlers and slept on those small hard knobs like a woman resting her skull on a bag of walnuts. Because a proper set doesn't happen by accident. This morning you unwind them, brush and shape the waves, and pin everything into the tidy, wholesome style the moment demands. A little spray, a check in the mirror, a smoothing of the front, then the lipstick applied with care because a made-up face is understood to be a courtesy you owe the household, the neighbours, and apparently the delivery men. And here is the punchline to the whole absurd ritual. You've now spent the better part of 40 minutes engineering yourself into a poised, polished, magazine-approved lady. Your destination, the kitchen, your grand agenda, scrubbing a floor on your hands and knees, wringing wet laundry through a machine that wants your fingers, and mopping up whatever the toddler flings. You're dressed, coiffed, girdled, and painted to a standard that would suit a luncheon, in order to perform the physical labour of a farmhand, indoors, unseen, for no one. The effort is enormous. The audience is a 2-year-old and a percolator. You take one last look in the mirror, nod at the presentable stranger nodding back, and head for the stove. Because somewhere in the house a family is waking up hungry, and they are not going to be impressed by your girdle. They are going to want breakfast. Now that you look presentable enough to be photographed for an advertisement about aspirin, it's time to feed the troops. And breakfast in this era is not a granola bar eaten over the sink while you cry gently about your commute. Breakfast is a production. You've got the percolator burbling away, filling the kitchen with that burnt bracing smell that passes for coffee, and on the stove you're managing porridge, eggs, bacon, and toast made one slice at a time under the broiler because a pop-up toaster is a luxury. Everyone wants something slightly different. Everyone wants it now, and everyone will critique it. Start with the porridge, because in a Canadian winter, porridge is less a food and more a strategy. Oats stick to the ribs, they say, and they need to because the walk to school is cold and the classrooms are drafty, and a child running on toast alone will fade by 10. So you stand over the pot, stirring the thick grey mass so it doesn't scorch, adding a knob of butter, a spoon of brown sugar for the ones who complain, a splash of top milk from the bottle whose cream you skim for the coffee. It bubbles and spits like a small tar pit. You have made it approximately 4,000 times. You will make it 4,000 more. Meanwhile, the bacon is going in the cast iron pan, and the whole kitchen fills with that heavy, glorious smell that makes the entire family suddenly appear in the doorway like summoned spirits. You crack eggs into the bacon fat because in 1955 nobody has heard a discouraging word about lard, and everybody is delighted about it. The toast, meanwhile, is a one-woman relay under the broiler, slice by slice, and you must watch each one like a hawk, because look away for a moment and you have produced charcoal, and charcoal means starting over, and starting over means the eggs go cold. Cooking breakfast here is like conducting an orchestra where every instrument is on fire and slightly behind the beat. Then there is the serving itself, which is a small war of preferences. This one won't eat the yolk. That one wants more sugar. The husband likes his eggs a specific way that changes depending on his mood, and which he will comment on either way. The baby is flinging porridge with the enthusiasm of an artist who has finally found their medium. You are pouring coffee, refilling milk, wiping a spill, catching a falling spoon, and fielding requests, all while your own plate sits somewhere, theoretically growing cold. And that is the quiet truth of this meal. You're the cook, the waitress, the busboy, and the clean-up crew, and you are, almost as an afterthought, supposedly also a diner. In practice, you eat standing up, if you eat at all, mostly the crusts nobody else wanted, and a few forkfuls snatched between crises. Your coffee goes lukewarm before you get 3 sips into it, a fate that will repeat at every single meal for the next 20 years. There's no such thing as sitting down to breakfast. There is only orbiting it. Finally, the plates are cleared enough that the family can scatter, and the table looks like a small disaster area of crumbs, smears, and abandoned toast corners. You survey the wreckage of the meal you built from scratch in the dark. The first of roughly 900 you will produce this week. It is not yet 7 in the morning, and already the most important departure of the day is looming, because the man of the house needs launching. With breakfast survived, it's time for the great morning ceremony, the launching of the husband. This is treated with the solemnity of a royal departure. His shirt must be ironed, his shoes must be found, his lunch must be packed into a metal box or a paper bag with the same care other cultures reserve for religious offerings. You hand him his hat and his newspaper, you receive a distracted peck on the cheek, and you watch him walk out into the world of paychecks, coffee breaks, and adult conversation. Consider the shirt, because the shirt is a whole institution. It was washed by you, wrung by you, dried by you, and pressed by you last night until the collar and cuffs were crisp as a fresh dollar bill. A man whose shirt is limp or grey reflects on his wife, everyone agrees, and so a small piece of your reputation walks out the door on his back every single morning. You help him into his jacket, you brush a bit of lint from his shoulder, you perform the little wifely fuss that the magazines assure you keeps a marriage warm. He accepts it the way a monument accepts pigeons, without particular notice. Then the lunch. You have been up since before dawn, and somewhere between the porridge and the eggs you also assembled a proper midday meal for a grown man, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, perhaps a boiled egg, a wedge of cake, a thermos of soup or coffee, all tucked into the black metal lunchbox or a neatly folded paper bag. Imagine packing someone a full picnic every day of your life, forever, and having it noticed only on the rare occasion you forget the dessert. That is the lunch. It is love, expressed in cold cuts and largely taken for granted. Now the ritual reaches its climax. You locate the missing shoe, because the shoe is always missing, and you produce the hat and the newspaper, the twin sceptres of the departing king. There is a kiss, brief and distracted, a comment about supper, and then he is gone, out the front door and into the cold, off to catch the streetcar or the bus or the train that carries him away to the city. He will spend his day being called Mr. and thanked for his contributions. He will have a lunch break during which he sits, uninterrupted, and eats a meal he did not make, an experience so foreign to you it may as well be a holiday abroad. And here is where the arrangement reveals itself in full. His workday is bounded. It starts when he arrives and ends when he leaves, and in between he is one man doing one job with, presumably, the occasional cup of coffee and colleague to complain to. Your workday has no such courtesy. It has no start whistle, no lunch bell, no 5 o'clock, no colleagues, no pay, and no end. You will still be working when he comes home, and you will still be working after he goes to bed. He is a commuter. You are a resident, a permanent fixture of the very workplace you can never leave. The door closes, the house exhales. You stand for 1/2 of 1 second in the sudden quiet, coffee cooling in your hand. And then a small voice from the kitchen informs you that someone has spilled something, and the next migration of the morning begins, because the children, bless them, are not going to get themselves to school. The husband is dispatched, but you are not free, because now there is the second, smaller migration to organise, the children, and there are a lot of them. This is the baby boom, and families of 4, 5 or 6 kids are not remarkable. They're just Tuesday. You've got to feed them, dress them in layers appropriate for a climate that wants them dead, find every mitten, locate the one boot that has fled under the Chesterfield, and get them out the door before the school bell. Let's talk numbers, gently and in words, because the scale is the whole point. After the war, Canadians produced babies with a national enthusiasm that would define a generation, and your household is doing its part with gusto. Where a modern family might agonise over the logistics of 2 children, you're quarterbacking a small platoon, each with their own schedule, temperament, grudge, and lost article of clothing. Getting them all pointed in the same direction at the same time is less parenting and more air traffic control, except the planes are arguing about whose turn it is on the sled. Then comes the dressing, which in this country is a seasonal ordeal unto itself. From roughly October to April, no child leaves this house without being encased in a full defensive system. Undershirt, shirt, sweater, snow pants, coat, scarf, toque, and mittens. The mittens threaded through the sleeves on a string precisely because they vanish otherwise. You stuff each child into this armour like you're packing a delicate instrument for shipping, zip them to the chin, and step back to admire a row of small immobile parcels who can no longer put their arms fully down. It is at this exact moment, always without fail, that the smallest one announces the need to use the bathroom, requiring you to dismantle the entire assembly and rebuild it from scratch. And the mittens. Oh, the mittens. Somewhere in this house is a drawer, a basket, a designated place where mittens live, and somehow it is always empty at the moment of departure. You're on your knees, peering under furniture, patting down coat pockets, interrogating suspects because a child cannot walk to school in a Canadian winter with bare hands, and everyone knows the walk is uphill, both ways, into a wind that files a report. The Great Mitten Hunt is a daily event, a recurring boss battle with no permanent victory, because tomorrow they will be lost again. Finally, miraculously, they are dressed, mittened, fed, and assembled at the door, a wobbling line of overstuffed little sausages, and you send them off into the frost with a wave and a warning to mind the traffic. There is no line of minivans idling at the curb, no chauffeur service, no supervised drop-off. They walk, in a pack, with the neighbourhood kids, the older ones nominally in charge of the younger, all of them disappearing down the snowy sidewalk toward a school where the teachers will spend the day undoing exactly none of your hard work by sending them home just as filthy. You close the door on the last of them, and the house drops into a silence so sudden and complete it almost rings. For one precious, shimmering moment, nobody needs anything from you. Nobody is crying, spilling, or losing a mitten. You could, in theory, sit down. You will not, of course. Because that silence is not the sound of rest arriving. It is the sound of the house, cluttered and dirty and waiting, quietly clearing its throat. The door has closed on the last of them, and for one glorious second there is silence. Do not be fooled. That silence is not rest, it's the house sizing you up. Because keeping a home in the 1950s spotless is not a chore, it's a moral obligation, and everyone from your mother-in-law to the women's magazines is watching. There are floors to wash on your knees, furniture to dust, beds to make with hospital corners, and a general expectation that the entire place should look like nobody actually lives in it. Survey the battlefield. Behind you is the wreckage of breakfast, a kitchen dusted in crumbs and porridge shrapnel. Down the hall a bed still warm and rumpled, blankets thrown back, sheets to be smoothed and tucked with corners so sharp you could bounce a coin. In the front room, ashtrays wait to be emptied, cushions to be plumped, the carpet to be swept or beaten or run over with the vacuum. Every surface has collected a fine film of coal dust and city grime overnight, because the furnace and the outside world conspire against you, and it must all be wiped away today, and again tomorrow, and again the day after that, forever. The floors are the great humbling. There is no spray mop, no robot gliding politely around the baseboards. There is a bucket, a brush, a bar of soap, and your own 2 knees on the hard, cold linoleum. You scrub in sections, wringing the grey water, working the corners by hand, the ammonia sharp in your nose and your knuckles going raw. When you finish a room, you sit back on your heels, and by the time you've done the last room, the first is already collecting footprints. It is the very definition of thankless. A labour whose only reward is the brief private knowledge that for 1 hour the floor was clean, a fact witnessed by no one. Here is the part that makes it heavier than mere work. A dirty house is not treated as a neutral fact, a simple matter of hours in the day. It is treated as a verdict on your character. A woman whose windows are streaked, or whose front step is unswept, is understood, quietly, by the neighbours and the relatives and the little voice the magazines have installed in your head to be lazy or sad or failing at the one job she was given. Cleanliness has been fused to virtue, and so every smudge carries a small charge of shame. You're not just tidying a room, you're defending your worth, one dusted shelf at a time, and the standard is impossible on purpose. The magazine photographs show homes where nothing is out of place, where no child has ever flung porridge and no husband has ever dropped a sock, and you are meant to aspire to that gleaming fiction while actually living with several small tornadoes and a coal furnace. It's a bit like being asked to keep a beach free of sand. You can work all day, sincerely and hard, and by supper the house will have quietly undone most of it, ready to demand the same performance tomorrow. So you tie the apron tighter, fetch the bucket, and get on with it, because the alternative, a house left to its own devices, is unthinkable. You will dust and scrub and smooth and sweep, and you will do a genuinely magnificent job, and no one will say a word because a clean house is invisible, and only a dirty one gets noticed. And speaking of Sisyphean labours that reset the moment you finish, we should talk about the specific day of the week the entire nation agreed to spend fighting its own dirty clothes. If the house is your daily enemy, then Monday is the pitched battle, because Monday, by ancient and unbreakable law, is wash day, and washing clothes in this era is a genuine physical ordeal. If you're lucky, you've got a wringer washer in the basement, a churning tub with 2 rollers on top that you feed each sopping garment through by hand to squeeze the water out. It is loud, it is heavy, and it has a well-documented appetite for fingers, sleeves, and the occasional unlucky braid. Understand first why Monday, specifically, and why it is not negotiable. The week has a rhythm as fixed as the tides. Wash on Monday, iron on Tuesday, and so on down the line, a schedule shared by nearly every household on the street, so that on Monday morning the whole neighbourhood is in effect at war together. To wash on a Wednesday would be a small scandal, evidence of a disorganised mind. So Monday it is, and Monday it will always be, a day that arrives each week with the cheer of a dentist appointment. Now to the machine itself, that basement beast. You fill it with hot water hauled or piped in, add the soap, and let it agitate the load in a churning grey soup. But the washing is only Act 1. The real drama is the wringer, those 2 rollers turning on top, through which every single item must be fed by hand to press the water out before it can be rinsed and hung. You guide a wet shirt into the gap, the rollers grab it and pull, and it emerges flattened on the far side like a cartoon character who met a steamroller. You do this for every garment, sheet and towel in the house, over and over, your hands inches from a mechanism that does not know the difference between a pillowcase and a thumb. And it will, given the chance, take the thumb. Ask any woman of the era, and she will tell you the wringer was no joke, that a moment's inattention, a loose sleeve, a distracting child, could catch a hand and pull the arm in after it. There is a release, if you can reach it in time, but the machine is faster than surprise, so you work with a wary respect, feeding the rollers, watching your fingers, a small daily gamble that this Monday, like most, you will end with the usual number of digits. It's a bit like operating heavy machinery, except you're doing it in a dress, in a cold basement, with a baby playing on a blanket at your feet. Then, of course, there is the sheer volume. A large family generates an avalanche of dirty clothing, work shirts and school clothes, diapers by the dozen washed by hand and boiled, sheets, towels, socks in numbers that defy belief. You are not doing a load. You are doing loads, plural, all morning, hauling wet fabric that weighs 3 times what it did dry, your back protesting with every lift, the basement thick with steam and soap and the metallic tang of hot water on iron pipes. By the time the last load has churned, wrung and rinsed, the morning is spent, your arms are jelly and you're damp to the elbows and beyond. And here is the truly Canadian cruelty of it, the part that turns a hard morning into an all-day campaign. All of this wet, heavy, freshly cleaned laundry now has to dry. in a country that spends half the year trying to freeze the water right back into it, which is a problem worth a segment all its own. So you've wrestled the wash through the wringer, and now it has to dry, which sounds simple until you remember where you live. In summer, fine, you peg it on the line out back and let the breeze do its work. But this is Canada, and for a solid half the year, drying laundry means marching outside into weather that could preserve a woolly mammoth. You hang wet sheets on the line in -20, and they don't dry so much as freeze solid, transforming into enormous stiff boards you then have to carry back inside like you're smuggling frozen doors. Picture the summer version first, because it is genuinely lovely, and you will need the memory to sustain you. On a warm day, you carry the heavy basket out to the yard, peg the wash along the line, and let the sun and wind do for free what a machine would charge you dearly to do. The sheets billow, the shirts snap in the breeze, and everything comes in smelling of outdoors. That clean, sun-warmed scent no bottle has ever quite captured. For a few precious months, laundry is almost pleasant. Almost. Then autumn tightens its grip, the temperature drops, and the whole enterprise turns strange and grim. You go out in your coat, breath fogging, fingers stiffening around the wooden pegs, and you hang the wet wash in the biting cold. And the laundry does not dry in the ordinary sense. It freezes. The water in the fabric turns to ice, and your husband's long underwear becomes a rigid man-shaped plank. The sheets become great pale sails of solid ice, and the whole line hangs there stiff and clattering like the flattened ghosts of your family. You unpeg these frozen effigies and carry them indoors, where they slowly thaw and finally finish drying, an ancient process called freeze-drying that you're performing by hand, unpaid, because you have no other choice. Bring it inside then, and the house pays the price. Every chair, every rack, every door and radiator becomes a drying surface, draped with damp shirts and thawing towels, the rooms filling with a heavy, soapy dampness that lingers for days. You duck under sagging clotheslines strung across the kitchen, navigate a maze of half-dry garments, and breathe air thick enough to grow mushrooms. Getting a large family's wash dry in a Canadian winter is not an afternoon task. It is a slow, all-consuming occupation that colonizes every warm corner of your home. Now, you know perfectly well that a solution exists because you have seen it, gleaming in white, in the pages of the Eaton's catalogue, the electric clothes dryer, a magical box that would take your sodden laundry and hand it back warm and fluffy in an hour. No frost, no frozen underwear, no kitchen jungle. It sits there on the page, taunting you, right beside a price that represents a genuinely serious chunk of the household's money. Money that is spoken for a dozen times over. So the dryer remains a dream, a thing other, richer households have, a small glowing symbol of a future in which your Monday does not stretch into Wednesday. For now, you make peace with the frost and the drape and the perpetual dampness, and you tell yourself, correctly, that fresh air makes it smell nice, even the frozen kind. You pull the last stiff board of a bedsheet off the line, your fingers aching, and you haul it inside to thaw. And once it finally dries, don't get comfortable, because everything you just spent 2 days washing and drying is now horribly, criminally wrinkled, and tomorrow is Tuesday. Wash Day has a cruel sequel, and its name is Ironing Day. Because in the 1950s, clothes come off the line stiff, wrinkled and defiant, and nearly everything must be pressed into submission. And I do mean everything. Shirts, dresses, trousers, tea towels, handkerchiefs, pillowcases, and yes, your husband's underwear, because apparently a rumpled undergarment reflects poorly on the household. You set up the board, heat the iron, and spend hours on your feet sprinkling water, pressing, folding, pressing again, in a kitchen slowly turning into a sauna. Start with the list, because the list is the horror. In a modern home, ironing has shrunk to the occasional dress shirt fished out in a panic before a meeting. In your home, ironing is a category of existence. Fabrics come out of the wash creased like crumpled paper, and the standard of the era demands that they be returned to crisp, smooth, respectable order. So you press the shirts, yes, but also the sheets, the pillowcases, the tablecloths, the tea towels, the handkerchiefs, the children's clothes, and undergarments that no living soul outside this family will ever see. You are pressing things whose only audience is a dresser drawer, because the standard is the standard, and the standard does not care about logic. The iron itself is a serious tool, a heavy wedge of hot metal, and using it well is a real skill. You heat it, test it, and if it's too hot you scorch, leaving a yellow-brown ghost of shame on a white collar that means the garment is ruined and the work is wasted. If it's too cool it does nothing, and the wrinkle wins. You keep a bowl of water nearby to sprinkle and dampen the fabric so the heat can smooth it, and you work each piece methodically. Collar first, then cuffs, then yoke, then sleeves, then the long stretches of the body. A whole choreography for a single shirt, repeated dozens of times. And the heat. Oh, the heat. In summer, the kitchen becomes an oven, and you stand at the board with sweat prickling at your temples, your carefully set hair going limp, pressing hot cotton in a hot room with a hot iron, wondering why the universe arranged things this way. In winter, at least, the extra warmth is almost welcome, one small mercy in a cold house. But summer or winter, the work is done on your feet, for hours, your shoulder and forearm aching from the steady press and lift and slide, the board wobbling, the pile refusing to shrink as fast as you'd like. Here is the quiet insult stitched into the whole task. Much of what you iron so carefully will be worn, sat in, slept on or wiped with, and wrinkled again within the day. The smoothness you fought for undone by an afternoon of ordinary living. You press a bed sheet to perfection, knowing it will be crumpled the moment someone sleeps in it. You iron a handkerchief that exists to be sneezed into. It is labour poured into things designed to be immediately unlaboured. A Tuesday spent battling entropy with a hot metal weight. And entropy, let's be honest, is undefeated. But you finish. You always finish. The great pile of wrinkled chaos becomes neat stacks of crisp, folded order, and for a moment the linen closet is a thing of genuine beauty, and your husband's shirts hang ready and sharp. You unplug the iron, flex your aching hand, and survey a job well and invisibly done, and you might, for one hopeful second, think that surely all these wondrous modern machines are here to lighten your load. Which is where the great cruel joke of the decade comes in. Now, you might be thinking, surely all these modern appliances made life easier, and here's the great cruel joke of the era. Yes, you might have a shiny new refrigerator humming in the corner, a proper electric or gas range, maybe even a vacuum cleaner that lets you retire the old carpet beater. These things are marvels, advertised as your liberation, your ticket to a life of leisure and pearls. But here's what actually happened. The machines didn't lower the workload. They raised the standard. Take the refrigerator, that proud white box purring in the corner of the kitchen. It is, objectively, a wonder. No more daily trips to the icebox man. No more worry about the milk turning by noon. A cold, clean, reliable place to keep the family's food. And yet notice what it quietly did to your life. Because you can now store food safely, you're now expected to keep a wider variety on hand, to plan more elaborate meals, to have the makings of a proper supper always ready. The machine solved a problem and, in the same breath, handed you 3 new expectations. The bar did not stay put. The bar never stays put. The vacuum cleaner tells the same story. Once a rug was beaten outdoors on the line a few times a year, a hard job but an occasional one, and a bit of dust in the carpet was simply the human condition. Now you have a machine that hums across the floor and lifts the dirt right out of the pile, which sounds like a gift until you follow the logic to its conclusion. Because the rug can now be spotless, the rug must now be spotless, and it must be so every single day, not a few times a season. The vacuum didn't free up your afternoon. It filled your afternoon with a daily task that used to be a rare one, all while a cheerful advertisement insisted you were being pampered. This is the pattern hiding behind every gleaming appliance in the showroom. The washing machine meant clothes could be cleaned more easily, so now they were washed far more often, and a garment worn twice was suddenly unacceptable. Better cleaning products meant a cleaner house was possible, so a merely tidy house was no longer good enough, only immaculate would do. Each labour-saving device saved labour in theory, and manufactured new labour in practice, because the moment a task became easier, the definition of a job well done leapt out of reach again. It's a bit like being handed a faster car only to be told the drive is now twice as long, and the advertising, my goodness, the advertising. Every magazine page shows a radiant woman in a spotless dress gazing at her new machine with something close to romantic devotion, freed at last, we're told, for a life of ease and pleasure and time with the children. The message is relentless and warm and completely upside down. The technology was real and genuinely useful, but the promised leisure never arrived, because the promised leisure was never the point. The point, quietly, was a rising standard of domestic perfection that always managed to consume whatever time the machines gave back. So you stand in your modern kitchen, surrounded by marvels your grandmother could not have dreamed of, working just as hard as she did, possibly harder, and being told with a bright smile how easy you have it. The appliances hum, the standards climb, and you, the woman at the centre of this shining, mechanized household, are handed better tools and in the very same breath informed that you have run clean out of excuses, which is a fine, bitter place to pause, because it's nearly time to leave the house and face the cold errand that no machine has yet volunteered to run for you. At some point in the morning, someone has to acquire the food, and that someone is you, on foot, in the weather, with a list and a budget that don't get along. Depending on where you live, this might mean the corner grocer where the man behind the counter fetches your items and writes them in a ledger, or one of the newer self-serve supermarkets where you push a cart down the aisles yourself. A genuinely novel concept. You buy fresh because the fridge is small and freezers barely exist, which means shopping is a frequent, heavy, ongoing task, not a monthly haul. Let's start with the older way, the corner store, because in much of the country it is still how things are done. You walk in, hand your list across the counter, and the grocer himself gathers your goods from the shelves behind him, weighing the flour, slicing the cheese, wrapping the meat in brown paper and string. He knows your name, your family, and possibly your business better than you'd like. He may keep a running tab in a ledger settled at the end of the week or the month, a small kindness and a small trap. Because a bill you cannot see growing is a bill that grows. It is personal, it is slow, and it is entirely dependent on staying in the good graces of one particular man with a pencil. Then there is the new marvel sweeping the growing towns and cities, the self-serve supermarket, where you take a cart or a basket and astonishingly select your own items from open shelves. This is genuinely strange and modern, the idea that a shopper should wander freely, handling the goods, comparing the prices, choosing for herself. The shelves are stacked high with tins and packages and boxes, brands shouting for your attention with bright labels, and you navigate it all doing arithmetic in your head, because the budget is watching and every choice is a small negotiation. It is more freedom and more work at once, which by now you will recognize as the theme of your entire life. Now, the reason you're doing this so often, hauling home groceries several times a week rather than once a month, comes back to that small humming refrigerator. It keeps things cold, yes, but it is not large, and a proper freezer is a luxury few kitchens have. So you cannot stockpile. You buy fresh meat, fresh milk, fresh vegetables in the amounts your family will actually eat before they spoil, which means the trip repeats endlessly, a rhythm of constant small resupply. Meal by meal, day by day, you are the supply line for an army of hungry people, and the supply line runs on your 2 feet. And here is the part that turns a task into an ordeal. You're almost certainly doing this without a car. The household has 1 automobile at most, and your husband took it to work this morning, leaving it parked at an office miles away while you stand in the cold with a list. So you walk, you carry a heavy bag or 2 or a child on your hip and the groceries in your arms, home along snowy sidewalks, and if the load is too big you go back again tomorrow. The advertisements show a smiling woman gliding a cart to a waiting station wagon. You're the woman trudging home on foot with a flour sack and a toddler, and you'd trade a great deal for that station wagon. You reach the front step, arms aching, and set the bags down to fish for the key. The food is home. Now, of course, someone has to turn it into meals, which is a bigger puzzle than it sounds. Getting the food home is only half of it, because before you can cook, you have to solve the daily riddle of what on earth to make, and this is a bigger job than it sounds. You're feeding a large family 3 times a day, every day, on a tight budget with limited ingredients, while somehow keeping it varied enough that nobody complains and nutritious enough that the magazines don't shame you. Your Bibles here are the cookbook and the pages of chatelaine, which dispense recipes, meal plans, and a steady drip of pressure to serve balanced, attractive, economical meals like it's nothing. Consider the scope of the problem, because it is relentless in a way that a single fancy dinner party could never be. This is not 1 meal to plan. It is 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, for a household of hungry, opinionated people, forever, with no repeats obvious enough to draw a complaint. Do the arithmetic in your head, as you constantly do, and it comes to something like 1,000 meals a year passing through your hands, each one requiring a decision, a shopping consequence, a cooking effort, and a clean-up. It is a logistics operation that never closes, and you are the entire planning department. Now layer in the budget, because the money is always the ceiling. You're not planning meals you'd like to make. You're planning meals you can afford to make, stretching the cheaper cuts of meat, building the week around what is in season and on sale, saving the roast for Sunday and finding 6 clever things to do with the leftovers so nothing is wasted. Waste is close to a sin here, a small failure of thrift, so the boiled potato becomes tomorrow's fried potato, the Sunday chicken becomes Monday's soup, and you plan not just meals but the afterlives of meals, a chess player thinking several moves ahead with a bird carcass. And then, on top of thrift, there is nutrition, because the era has discovered that food is science and has decided you are the household scientist. The magazines and the pamphlets preach the food groups, the importance of balance, the vitamins, the protein, the necessity of a proper hot meal to raise strong children in a cold country. You're meant to deliver meals that are cheap, varied, attractive, and nutritionally correct all at once, hitting every requirement like a nutritionist working a diner budget, and to do it so smoothly that it looks like no thought went into it at all. Your allies in this endless campaign are the printed word. There is the trusted cookbook, its pages splattered and soft from use, and above all there is Chatelaine, the Canadian magazine that speaks directly to women like you, dispensing recipes, weekly meal plans, and homemaking wisdom in a friendly, capable voice. It is genuinely useful, a lifeline of ideas when your imagination runs dry at the thought of yet another supper. It is also, quietly, another source of pressure, its glossy photographs setting a standard of gleaming roasts and perfect moulded desserts that your real kitchen, with its real budget and real toddler, can only chase. So you sit for a moment with the list and the magazine and the arithmetic, planning the week like a general planning a campaign, balancing money and nutrition and variety and taste and the strong preferences of small tyrants. It is invisible, unpaid, ceaseless intellectual labour, and no one will ever call it that. They will simply expect supper. And speaking of supper, the day is turning, and the most scrutinised meal of all is coming. Now, to the main event, the meal the entire day secretly revolves around. Supper. It must be hot. It must be on the table when the man of the house walks in, and it must look like something out of an advertisement. This is the golden age of the casserole, the roast, the boiled vegetable, and above all the mysterious reign of the jellied salad. Yes, this is the era when a woman was expected to suspend shredded carrots, canned peaches, or, God help us, tuna and celery inside a wobbling mould of flavoured gelatin and present it proudly as a salad. Begin with the timing, because supper is a performance with a hard curtain. It must be ready, hot and complete, at the precise moment your husband walks through the door, which means you've spent the late afternoon in a careful choreography of pots and timings. The roast resting, the potatoes done, the vegetables not yet gone to mush, everything peaking at once like a small culinary fireworks display. Get it wrong and the meat is dry or the man is kept waiting, both understood to be your failing. It is a bit like being asked to land a plane on a moving target, daily, while a toddler clings to your leg and the baby cries. The food itself sits at a fascinating crossroads of the era's tastes. There is the honest, hearty cooking of a cold country, the roasts and stews and pork chops, the potatoes in every conceivable form, the boiled vegetables cooked with a thoroughness that would alarm a modern cook. And there is the rise of the casserole, that magnificent invention that lets you stretch a little meat across a whole family with the help of a tin of soup and a topping of something crunchy. The busy woman's best friend, one dish, one oven, one prayer. But we must speak, seriously and at length, about gelatin, because no discussion of this decade's table is complete without it. The flavoured gelatin dessert has escaped the dessert course entirely and staged a full takeover of the meal, and the results are, to modern eyes, genuinely baffling. Women everywhere are suspending things in wobbling, jewel-toned moulds and calling the result a salad. Shredded cabbage and carrot in lime green, canned fruit in orange, and, in the era's boldest moments, savoury creations holding tuna, celery, olives, or shrimp trapped forever in a quivering dome. It is bright, it is jiggly, it is presented with total sincerity, and it is somehow both a triumph of modern convenience and a small crime against food. Why did it happen? Blame the marketing, blame the new refrigerator that made a set mould possible in any kitchen, blame the era's deep love of anything that looked engineered and modern and neat. A gleaming, perfectly unmoulded gelatin salad said something about a hostess, that she was capable, current, in command of the latest techniques, and so women poured their real skill and effort into these shimmering monuments. You will make them too, carefully, following the recipe from the magazine, and you will set the trembling thing on the table with genuine pride. And here is the quiet comedy at the heart of the meal. You have spent hours planning, shopping, timing and cooking a hot, balanced, attractive supper, crowned with a salad that defies the laws of nature, and the family will sit, eat it in 15 minutes flat, offer a grunt of approval at best, and scatter. The gelatin will be eaten without a single question asked, because questioning the jellied salad is questioning the entire social order. You will smile, clear the plates, and begin the dishes. But before we leave the kitchen, we have to talk about where a good deal of this food came from and the sweaty autumn ritual that put it there. Before we move on, we have to talk about the great seasonal marathon that separates a true 1950s housewife from an amateur: canning and preserving. When the garden comes in or the harvest hits the markets, especially on the farms and in the small towns, you don't just eat it, you save it, because winter is coming and the grocery bill is real. So you spend the tail end of summer and the whole of autumn in a boiling hot kitchen, blanching, peeling, chopping and sealing jar after jar of tomatoes, beans, pickles, jams and fruit. Understand first why anyone would willingly do this, and the answer is simple and Canadian. The winter is long, the fresh produce vanishes, and the grocery budget cannot carry the family through to spring on store-bought tins alone. So when the tomatoes ripen all at once, when the beans flood in, when the fruit is cheap and abundant at the market, you seize the moment and put it up, transforming a fleeting glut into rows of jars that will feed your family through the frozen months. It is thrift, foresight and survival, dressed up as a domestic art, and on the farms especially it is not optional. A full cellar in October is a warm feeling in February. Now to the labour, which is genuinely brutal. Preserving means heat, endless heat, because everything must be boiled, the produce blanched, the jars sterilised, the sealed jars processed in a canner of furiously boiling water. So you do this in the warmest part of the year, standing over a stove that turns the kitchen into a furnace, steam fogging the windows, sweat soaking through your dress, your hands scalded and stained from peeling and chopping mountains of vegetables and fruit. Imagine running a small factory in a sauna for days on end, and you begin to grasp the reality of preserving season. And then there is the pressure cooker, that hissing, rattling presence on the stove, essential for putting up low-acid vegetables safely and rightly regarded with a mixture of respect and outright fear. It sits there under pressure, its little valve jiggling and shrieking, building up a head of steam that everyone knows can, if neglected or faulty, let go with spectacular and messy consequences. Every woman of the era has a story, or knows one, about a lid that blew and redecorated a ceiling with stewed tomatoes. You keep a wary eye on it, the way you keep a wary eye on the wringer and the furnace, another household machine that helps you enormously while quietly threatening to hurt you. The volume too is staggering, because you're not putting up a cute half-dozen jars for a farmer's market table. You're laying in a winter's supply for a large family, dozens upon dozens of jars of tomatoes and beans and peas and corn, pickles of every kind, relishes and chutneys, jams and jellies from the summer berries, applesauce and canned peaches and pears. It is production on an industrial scale, done entirely by hand, in your own kitchen, by you, over weeks of hot, sticky, repetitive work that leaves your back aching and your fingernails permanently stained. But then it is done, and you stand in the cool of the cellar and look at the shelves, and the feeling is real and earned. Rows upon rows of glass jars glow in the dim light, ruby and gold and green, a fortress of food against the coming cold, every one of them filled by your own two scalded hands. It is genuinely magnificent. It very nearly killed you. And that cold you're preserving against is no longer coming. It's here, which means it's time to talk about the daily war just to keep this house warm. Speaking of the cold, let's address the elephant in the freezing room. Keeping this house warm through a Canadian winter is a job all by itself. Down in the basement lurks the furnace, a great iron beast that runs on coal or oil and demands constant attention. If it's coal, someone shovels it and hauls out the ash, and that someone is often you. The heat rises unevenly, so the kitchen roasts while the back bedrooms stay cold enough to store meat. Meet the beast first, because your comfort and your family's survival depend on it. In the basement squats the furnace, a hulking iron thing with pipes reaching up through the house, like the arms of some slumbering creature, and it is hungry. If it burns coal, and many still do, then somebody must feed it, shoveling load after load into its glowing mouth to keep it going, and then, when the fire has done its work, raking out and hauling away the ash and clinker it leaves behind. This is heavy, dirty, physical work, and while it might be framed as a man's job, the man is at the office all day and the fire cannot wait for him. So the shoveling and the stoking and the ash hauling fall, as so much does, to you. The coal itself is a whole grimy saga. It arrives and is stored in a bin in the basement, a black mountain that dusts everything it touches, working its fine grit into the air, onto the shelves, across the very laundry you fought so hard to clean. Tending the fire means descending into that sooty gloom several times a day, feeding it enough to keep the house above misery without burning through your fuel budget too fast, because coal costs money and the pile has to last the winter. It is like keeping a large temperamental animal alive in your cellar, one that will freeze your family if you neglect it and bankrupt you if you overfeed it. Now consider how the warmth is actually distributed, which is to say, badly. Heat rises and drifts as it pleases, so the rooms near the furnace and the kitchen with its hard-working stove are toasty, even stifling, while the far bedrooms and the upstairs corners stay stubbornly, bitterly cold. Children sleep under mountains of quilts and wear socks to bed. You dress in the warm room and dash through the cold ones, and everyone develops an intimate map of the house's warm spots and cold spots, gravitating to the good chairs near the heat, like cats hunting a sunbeam. Then there are the defences you mount against the cold trying to get in, an annual campaign waged on the very structure of the house. Each fall you wrestle the heavy storm windows into place over the regular ones, an extra layer of glass against the wind, and you block the drafts that sneak under doors with rolled towels and rugs. Still the cold finds a way, seeping through the walls and around the frames, so that on the worst mornings the water left in the kettle overnight wears a skin of ice, and the frost blooms thick and feathery on the inside of the panes, beautiful and unwelcome all at once. So you keep the fire fed, and the drafts blocked, and the family bundled, waging a constant grinding war against a climate that would happily freeze you all where you sit. It is exhausting, sooty, unrelenting work, and like everything else, it is simply expected, noticed only if it fails. You climb the basement stairs, brushing coal dust from your hands, and just as you catch your breath, the telephone gives its particular ring, and you brace yourself because the phone in this house is never quite private. Let's talk about the telephone, because it's about to become your lifeline and your greatest source of low-grade paranoia. If you're in a town or on a farm, you likely share a party line, meaning your phone connection is split among several neighbouring households on the same wire. When you pick up to make a call, you might find Mrs. Peterson 3 doors down already deep in conversation, and you're expected to hang up politely and wait, though of course everyone listens in, and everyone knows everyone listens in. Start with how the thing even works, because it is stranger than a modern ear can easily believe. Your telephone is not yours alone. The line running to your house is shared among several homes in the area, all wired together, so that at any moment the line might be in use by someone else entirely. Each household has its own distinctive ring, a pattern of long and short rings, so that when the phone sounds you listen to the pattern to know whether the call is for you or for one of your neighbours. It is a bit like a shared apartment mailbox, except the mail is spoken aloud and everyone can reach in. Which brings us inevitably to the eavesdropping, the open secret at the heart of every party line. When the phone rings for someone else, you are supposed to ignore it, and you are also, being human, deeply tempted to gently lift the receiver and listen in. Everyone knows this happens. Everyone does it, at least a little. You learn to speak carefully on the phone, assuming an audience, because the news that you told your sister about your husband's raise or your neighbour's new coat will somehow reach the whole street by supper time, having travelled the wire in the ears of listeners who are absolutely not listening. It is the original social network, complete with a full complement of lurkers. The etiquette around all this is elaborate and quietly tense. If you pick up to make a call and find the line already in use, courtesy demands you hang up at once and try again later, and courtesy also demands you not stay on too long yourself because others are waiting. But courtesy and human nature are old rivals, and there is always someone, a particular neighbour perhaps, who ties up the line for ages, gossiping happily while 3 other households wait with urgent calls to make. You develop opinions about your line mates, strong ones, based entirely on their telephone manners, a whole social hierarchy conducted over a shared wire. And yet, for all its lack of privacy, the telephone is a genuine gift, because your days are lonely in a way that is hard to overstate. Out in the suburbs or on the farm, with your husband gone all day and the neighbours busy behind their own walls, the phone is a thread connecting you to your mother, your sister, your friends, the women who understand exactly what your day is like. A quick call in the afternoon, a shared complaint, a laugh, a recipe traded, a bit of news. These small conversations are oxygen, breaking the isolation of a house full of children and no adults. That it comes bundled with an eavesdropping audience is simply the price of admission. So you handle the phone with a mix of gratitude and guardedness, treasuring the connection while measuring your words, forever aware that a soft click on the line means someone has joined your conversation uninvited. It is your window on the world and your window into everyone else's all at once. You hang up, having said just enough and not too much, and turn back to a subject even less private than the party line and considerably more delicate: the money. Now here's a delicate one. The money. On paper, the household finances run through you, because you're the one buying the food, the clothes, the everyday necessities, and you're expected to stretch every dollar like it's made of taffy. But the paycheck is your husband's, deposited into an account that's often in his name, and depending on the man, you might receive a set allowance for housekeeping and little else. Look first at the daily reality, which makes you appear for all the world like the family's chief financial officer. You are the one who knows what milk costs and what a roast costs and how far a dollar goes at the butcher. You do the shopping, you pay the corner grocer's tab, you keep the household running on a sum that never feels like quite enough, performing small miracles of thrift week after week. In the trenches of daily spending, you're unquestionably in charge, the manager of a tight and demanding budget, and you are genuinely good at it, because you have no choice but to be. But look up from the daily arithmetic and the picture changes sharply, because the source of the money is not you. The paycheck belongs to your husband, earned at his job, and in the customs of the era it very often lands in a bank account bearing his name, under his control. A married woman in these years can find the machinery of money quietly arranged around her husband. Accounts, credit, and larger financial decisions treated as his domain, with her position depending heavily on his goodwill. You manage the money, yes, but you do not own it. A distinction that seems small until the day it doesn't. How much you actually control comes down, uncomfortably, to what kind of man you married. With a generous and fair-minded husband, you might be handed the housekeeping money freely and trusted to run things as you see fit, even consulted on the big decisions. With a controlling or tight-fisted one, you might receive a fixed, meagre allowance for the household and be expected to account for every penny, with nothing set aside for yourself and any personal want requiring a request, an explanation, a small swallowing of pride. Two women on the same street doing the identical job might live in entirely different financial worlds, depending on the temperament of the man whose name is on the account. And that is why the small trick of skimming becomes so common and so quietly understood. Many a woman shaves a little from the grocery money, pads the reported cost of the butcher just slightly, and squirrels away the difference in a jar or a drawer or the folds of a rarely used dish, building a tiny private reserve of money that is truly, undeniably her own. It is not dishonesty so much as self-defense, a way to have a few dollars that require no permission, no explanation, no man's approval. It is a small act of independence conducted in nickels and dimes. There is, however, one shining exception to all of this, one stream of money that flows directly and reliably into your hand. The family allowance, the baby bonus, sent by the government each month for every child, and crucially, made payable to the mother. It isn't much per child, but it is yours, deposited in your name, spent at your discretion, and for a great many women it is the only money in the household that owes nothing to anyone's goodwill. It is a genuinely radical little check, and you will need every scrap of independence it represents, because the world has a great many other expectations of you, starting with how you're supposed to look while doing all of this. Amid all the labour, there's another expectation stacked quietly on top. You must look lovely doing it. The magazines, the ads, the neighbours, they've all agreed that a good wife greets her husband at day's end looking fresh, pretty and delighted to see him, as though she hasn't spent 9 hours on her knees and elbows. So you find pockets of time to set your hair, mind your figure, refresh your lipstick, and keep your hands from looking like you've wrung out 40 pounds of wet laundry, which you have. Consider the central, impossible demand of it. You're meant to look effortless while expending enormous effort. The ideal woman of the advertisements is radiant and composed, her hair perfect, her face fresh, her dress uncreased, and she achieves this apparently by magic, since no labour is ever shown troubling her serene surface. You, meanwhile, achieve the appearance of that magic through actual work, squeezed into the cracks of an already overflowing day, so that the finished product looks like nature and is in fact a second full-time job layered invisibly over the first. It's a bit like being required to look as though you just woke up flawless while actually rising an hour early to arrange it. The hair alone is a standing commitment. A proper set does not happen on its own, so you sleep on curlers, or you spend precious time with pins and rollers and spray, coaxing your hair into the tidy, wholesome waves the moment approves of, and then you protect that set jealously through the steam of ironing and the sweat of scrubbing. When it falls, you set it again. A woman with neglected hair is read, unfairly, as a woman who has let herself go, which is understood to be the first step on a short road to letting everything go, and so the hair is maintained with the vigilance of a soldier polishing boots. Then there is the matter of the figure, that quiet, constant pressure to stay slim and trim and pleasing, which sits atop everything else like an unwelcome supervisor. The magazines are full of it, the ideal silhouette forever on display, and you are meant to hit it while cooking 3 hearty meals a day for a family that expects rich food and clean plates. You manage your own portions, you mind what you eat even as you cook mountains of it for others, and the girdle stands ready to smooth over whatever the discipline doesn't. The message is relentless and rarely spoken aloud. Your body too is part of the housekeeping. Into this steps the Avon lady, a small bright spot in the routine, arriving at your door with her case of creams, powders and lipsticks, offering both the products and a few minutes of friendly adult company. Beauty is sold to you as a treat, a bit of pampering, a small indulgence you deserve, and there is real pleasure in it, in a new shade of lipstick or a nice cold cream, a rare permission to spend a little on yourself. But notice how neatly the treat doubles as a duty, how the pampering is also the maintenance of a standard you're required to meet. The gift and the obligation wear the same pretty packaging, so you keep your hands from cracking, your face made up, your hair set, and your figure minded, presenting to your husband each evening the fresh and cheerful wife the era demands, betraying no sign of the 9 hours of hard physical labour that lie behind the smile. It is exhausting in a particular quiet way, this performance of ease. Even your own face has been folded into the endless list of things that must be kept up, and the same tireless upkeep, it turns out, is expected of the small people you're raising, though they are considerably harder to set with pins and spray. Let's turn to the children, several of them, because raising them is arguably the whole point of this arrangement, and everyone has opinions about how you're doing it. Your parenting Bible is Dr. Spock, whose enormously popular book has convinced a generation of mothers to trust themselves while somehow also making them anxious about every decision. You're managing scraped knees, squabbles, homework, manners, illnesses, and the general chaos of many small people in one house, and you're doing it largely alone during the day. Start with the sheer number of them, because parenting in the baby boom is parenting at scale. You are not shepherding one carefully planned child through a curated childhood. You are running a bustling, noisy household of several, spread across a range of ages, each at a different stage of need and mischief. The baby needs holding, the toddler needs watching every waking second, the school-aged ones need feeding and refereeing and homework help, and they all need it at once from you, the single adult on duty for the long hours between the school bell and the husband's return. It is less tender one-on-one nurturing and more the cheerful crowd control of a very small, very loud institution. Your great authority in all this is Dr. Spock, whose book on baby and childcare sits on shelves across the continent and has quietly reshaped how a generation is raised. His message is warm and, for the time, gently revolutionary. Trust yourself, he tells mothers. You know more than you think. Be affectionate, be reasonable. Ease off the rigid schedules and harsh rules of the previous generation. It is genuinely comforting advice, a friendly voice on the page reassuring you that your instincts are sound. It is also, in a subtle way, a new source of pressure, because now every decision is one you're meant to get right through good judgment, and a difficult child can feel like a personal verdict on yours. The daily work of it is endless and unglamorous. You're the nurse who tends the scraped knee and the fevered brow, the judge who settles the ferocious disputes over whose turn it is and who touched whom, the teacher who hears the reading and checks the sums, the etiquette instructor drilling please and thank you and elbows off the table. You do this all day, on your feet, while also cooking and cleaning and laundering, your attention split a dozen ways, one ear always cocked for the particular silence that means a child has found something dangerous or delicious or both. Discipline is largely yours to enforce, and you enforce it with a mix of patience, weariness, and the occasional deployment of the era's great strategic reserve, the warning that this behaviour will be reported to father upon his return. It is a curious arrangement, this outsourcing of ultimate authority to a man who is absent for the crime and arrives only for the sentencing, but it holds a certain power precisely because he is the rare and serious event, while you are the constant. You would rather handle it yourself mostly, and mostly you do, saving the heavy artillery for when your own considerable authority has been genuinely exhausted. Through it all, you're expected to produce the finished product the era prizes, polite, healthy, well-adjusted children who reflect well on the family and grow into upstanding citizens, all raised on a tight budget with limited help and infinite patience. The patience, it must be said honestly, is not actually infinite. You simply become extraordinarily skilled at faking it, at holding a calm face over a frayed nerve. And the reason there are so many small citizens to raise in the first place brings us to something that shapes this entire chapter of your life. A subject the era preferred to handle in hushed tones. Here's something that shapes this entire decade of your life. The babies keep coming. This is the height of the boom. Reliable birth control is legally restricted and hard to get, and large families are simply the expectation. So chances are you're pregnant, recovering from being pregnant, or bracing to be pregnant again, often with only a year or two between children. Childbirth increasingly happens in a hospital now, under a doctor's care, which is safer than the old days, but often impersonal, with you as more of a patient than a participant. Begin with the reason the babies arrive in such a steady procession, because it is not entirely a matter of choice. In these years, the means of reliably preventing pregnancy are legally restricted and socially discouraged. The whole subject wrapped in silence and shame, and in fact tangled up in the law itself. Frank information is scarce, access is difficult, and the open, practical family planning a later generation will take for granted simply does not exist for most women. Add to that a culture that celebrates the large, bustling family as the very picture of post-war success, and the result is predictable. Children arrive close together, year after year, whether or not your body or your budget or your spirit was ready for the next. So your adult life becomes a long cycle with pregnancy at its centre. You're expecting, or you're recovering from a birth, or you're nursing an infant while quietly suspecting the next is already on the way. The stages blurring together across the decade with barely a pause between. Each pregnancy is carried while you continue the full labour of the household, the cooking and cleaning and hauling and chasing of the children you already have, because the work does not pause for a swelling belly. There is no putting your feet up, no lightened load. You simply grow larger and more tired while doing exactly as much as before. The birth itself has moved over these years, from the home to the hospital, and this is genuinely safer. A real reduction in the dangers that once made childbirth so deadly for mother and child alike. But safety has come bundled with a certain cold impersonality. In the hospital you are a patient, managed and medicated and directed by a doctor, more often than not a man, while your husband waits somewhere else entirely, pacing a waiting room by custom, because his presence at the birth is neither expected nor welcomed. You labour among strangers, on their schedule, by their methods, a participant strangely sidelined in the most physical event of your own life. And then, the part that no magazine advertisement ever shows, there is no rest at the end of it. You come home from the hospital with a newborn to a house that has kept right on needing everything in your absence, to older children who still need feeding and minding, to a husband who still expects his supper and his ironed shirt. There is no maternity leave from this job because this job has no employer to grant it and no substitute to cover it. The recovery a birth demands is a luxury the household cannot spare, so you rise sore and exhausted and resume the endless work, a new baby on your hip and the same long day stretching ahead. The toll of this, carried year after year, is enormous and largely unspoken, a physical and emotional weight that the cheerful public image of motherhood politely declines to mention. You love the children, fiercely and truly, and you're also worn thin by the relentlessness of bearing and raising them with so little pause and so little help. Rest, real rest, becomes a concept you mainly encounter in the very magazines that pile the expectations higher. And that quiet, mounting exhaustion, the kind no one is supposed to name out loud, leads us straight into a corner of this life the era worked hardest to keep hidden. Let's gently address something the era preferred not to discuss out loud. With the isolation of the suburbs, the relentless workload, and the pressure to be endlessly cheerful about all of it, a great many women found themselves exhausted, anxious, and quietly unhappy in a way that had no acceptable name. You couldn't very well announce that the dream house and the shiny appliances left you feeling hollow, so instead you had nerves. Understand first how airtight the trap was, because that is what made it so heavy. On the outside, your life is the picture of success the whole country agreed to want. The tidy house, the healthy children, the hard-working husband, the modern appliances humming in every room. You're supposed to be happy. You have by every measure the era offers been given everything a woman could ask for. And so, if you feel tired past the bone, or lonely, or flattened by a sameness that stretches to the horizon, there is no permitted way to say so, because to say so would be to seem ungrateful for a life everyone insists is a dream. So the feeling goes underground and takes a quieter, more acceptable shape. You don't say you are unhappy, you say you are run down, or you have a headache, or your nerves are bad today. The word nerves does a great deal of work in these years, a small, respectable container for a large, unnameable thing, a way to gesture at exhaustion and sadness and quiet desperation without ever calling them by name. It lets a woman admit she is struggling while pretending the struggle is purely a matter of a delicate constitution, rather than a reasonable response to an unreasonable load. When the nerves become too much to hide, the road leads to the doctor, and the doctor, almost always a man, receives you kindly and reaches for the tools of his time. He might offer a tonic, a sedative, something to take the edge off and help you rest, along with reassurance and a gentle suggestion to slow down and count your blessings. It is meant well, mostly, and it addresses the surface. It can quiet the symptoms, smooth the sharp edges, get you back on your feet and back to the work. What it does not do, what it is not designed to do, is ask whether the life itself might be the thing pressing down on you. Because that is the question the whole arrangement is built to avoid. The possibility that the problem is not a flaw in the woman but a flaw in the situation, that a human being asked to labour without pause, without pay, without much company or credit or say, might quite reasonably come apart at the seams, is simply not on the table. The trouble is located in you, in your nerves, your constitution, your failure to appreciate your good fortune, never in the design of a life that isolates and exhausts so many at once. It is a great deal easier to soothe one woman than to question a whole way of living. And so you take the tonic, or you don't, and you accept the kind advice, and you rise the next morning and do it all again, because the children still need feeding and the floors still need scrubbing and the world has no slot for a housewife who simply stops. The ache stays, quiet and unnamed, carried alongside the laundry and the meals. Thank goodness, then, for the one thing that genuinely helps, the thing the doctor could never bottle, the company of the other women on the street who are quietly carrying the very same weight. Thank goodness, then, for the other women, because they are the reason you stay sane. Out here in the new suburbs, the days can be desperately lonely. One woman alone in a house with the children while the men vanish to the city. So you find each other. Mid-morning, once the worst of the chores are beaten back, you gather in someone's kitchen for coffee, a little cake, and a lot of talk. Start with the loneliness, because the gathering only makes sense against it. The new suburbs are built on a simple, isolating pattern. The men leave in the morning for the city and its offices, taking the car and the adult conversation with them, and the women remain behind, each in her own house, each with her own children, scattered across the quiet daytime streets like islands. There are no co-workers, no water cooler, no shared lunchroom, none of the built-in human contact a job provides. Just you, the kids, and the long silent hours. A solitude that can press on a person until the walls seem to lean in. The answer the women invent for themselves is beautifully simple. They gather. Once the morning's worst chores have been beaten into temporary submission, you cross to a neighbour's kitchen, or she crosses to yours, and a small ritual unfolds round a fresh pot of coffee and whatever cake or squares are on hand. Children play underfoot or nap in another room, and the women sit and talk, and for an hour the isolation lifts. This is the coffee clatch, and it happens on kitchen after kitchen across the street, a quiet, informal institution holding the whole lonely arrangement together. Do not mistake it for idle chatter, though there is plenty of glorious chatter in it. Yes, there is gossip, the news of the street traded and turned over with relish, and there is nothing wrong with that, because gossip is also information, a way of knowing who needs help and who is struggling and what is really going on behind the tidy front doors. But there is far more besides. There is advice, hard-won and freely given, on colicky babies and stubborn stains and difficult husbands. There is commiseration, the deep relief of hearing another woman say she feels it too. There are recipes and patterns and hand-me-downs passed along. It is a support system with no name and no budget, run entirely on coffee and mutual need. Above all, there is recognition, which may be the thing you crave most and get least elsewhere. Your husband does not really see the work, the magazines only scold, and the wider world treats what you do as invisible and automatic. But the woman across the kitchen table sees it exactly, because she is doing the identical work in the identical kind of house. And when you catch each other's eye over a complaint about the wringer or the ironing or a child's tantrum, there is an understanding that needs no explaining. You are known here in a way you're known almost nowhere else. That is worth more than the coffee, and the coffee is genuinely good. So the coffee clatch is not a frivolity or a way to fill idle time, of which you have none. It is a lifeline, a daily or near-daily act of collective survival, women propping one another up because no one else will. It costs nothing and holds everything together. And out of these warm, talkative kitchens grows something enterprising, a way the women turn their gatherings into a little something more, complete with games, prizes, and a suspicious quantity of plastic containers. Out of that world of neighbourly gatherings grows one of the decade's cleverest inventions, the home party. Someone hosts, everyone comes, and the entertainment is, improbably, buying plastic containers. The Tupperware party turns your living room into a showroom, complete with games, prizes, and a peppy demonstration of how these miraculous burping lids will change your life. Similar arrangements sell cosmetics, cookware, and cleaning products, all pitched woman to woman, in the home, over refreshments. Picture the scene, because it is a small marvel of social engineering. A hostess opens her home, invites the neighbourhood women, and lays on coffee and refreshments, and into this friendly gathering steps the saleswoman with her wares. There are games, silly and fun, with little prizes to keep the mood bright, and then the demonstration, an enthusiastic performance in which the sealable plastic containers are shown off in all their glory, the famous lids pressed down and burped to prove their airtight magic. It is part sales pitch, part party, part social event, and it is aimed with laser precision at exactly the audience gathered in that living room. The genius of it is that it takes the coffee clatch, the thing women already do, and quietly attaches a cash register to it. The setting is warm and familiar, the company is friends and neighbours, the pressure is soft and social rather than hard and commercial, and so the buying feels less like shopping and more like joining in. Who wants to be the only woman at the party who didn't want the clever containers everyone else is oohing over? The whole model runs on friendship and mild, pleasant obligation, and it moves an astonishing amount of merchandise doing it. The same trick powers a whole ecosystem of home selling. Cosmetics come to your door in your parties, cookware is demonstrated in your neighbour's kitchen, cleaning products are hawked over squares and coffee, all of it sold woman to woman, in homes, through the existing web of female friendship. The companies figured out something shrewd, that the isolated suburban housewife was both a perfect customer and a perfect saleswoman, embedded in exactly the social network that could move their goods, and they built their whole approach around her. And here, quietly, is the part that matters more than the plastic. For the woman doing the selling, hosting the parties, and earning a commission, this is one of the very few socially acceptable ways to make money of her own. She's not taking a job, which might raise eyebrows about her husband's ability to provide. She's just having fun with friends, just being sociable, just helping out with a little extra pin money. But the money's real, and so is the small taste of independence, the accounts kept in her own name, the earnings that answer to no one's allowance. It is enterprise dressed up as an afternoon party, and for some women it is a first crack in the door. So you go to the parties and you host them, and you come home with more sealable containers than any kitchen truly needs, and you tell yourself you went for the company, which is true. But watch the woman running the show, the one with the case of samples and the order book, and you may catch a glimpse of something the era rarely let women hold openly. A bit of their own money and a bit of their own reach. You came for the coffee and the gossip. You're leaving with 3 casserole keepers and a small, unfamiliar flicker of possibility, which, this being the 1950s, must be kept respectable, and nothing pleases respectability quite like the institution you'll be dressed up for on Sunday. Whatever you may privately feel, appearances must be maintained, and few institutions matter more to those appearances than the church. Sunday means the whole family scrubbed, pressed, and marched to the pew, you in your good hat and gloves, the children terrifyingly clean, your husband looking like a man who has never once slept through a baby's cry. Beyond the service itself, church is the social backbone of the community. Begin with the Sunday morning production, which is its own small logistical triumph. Getting a large family churchward means bathing and dressing every child in their best clothes, the ones kept clean for exactly this, wrestling the little ones into stiff collars and polished shoes, doing your own hair and face to the required standard, and turning yourself out in your good hat and gloves, because a lady does not enter a church bareheaded or unkempt. Your husband appears calm and rested and dignified, the very portrait of a solid family man, an image you constructed for him with the same hands that were up at dawn. The whole family, assembled and gleaming, files into the pew as a single polished unit. That unit is a message, and everyone in the congregation is fluent in reading it. A family arriving together, well-dressed, well-behaved, on time, week after week, announces itself as decent, stable, upstanding, the kind of family that belongs. The scrubbed children testify to your diligence, the pressed shirts to your care, the mere fact of attendance to your virtue. Church is where respectability is publicly performed and publicly witnessed, a weekly opportunity to show the community that all is well behind your front door, whether or not it entirely is. For many, of course, the faith is real and deep, a genuine source of comfort and meaning in a hard and uncertain life, and none of the social performance cancels that out. You may pray sincerely, find real solace in the hymns and the ritual, lean on your belief through the exhausting weeks. The spiritual and the social sit side by side in the same pew, sincere devotion and careful appearance woven together so tightly that pulling them apart would be a strange exercise. You can mean every word and also be acutely aware of who is watching. Beyond the Sunday service, the church is the beating social heart of the community, and much of that heart is powered by women like you. There are the bake sales and the bazaars, the ladies' auxiliary and the guild, the committees and the volunteer work that keep the whole enterprise running. And it is the women who do the lion's share of it, organising, cooking, cleaning, arranging, holding the community together with unpaid labour just as they hold their homes together. It is real influence, of a kind, a place where women's competence is needed and felt, even as the formal authority up at the pulpit remains firmly in male hands. And everywhere, always, there is the watching, the great engine of a small town or suburban life. Everyone observing everyone, quietly noting who came and who didn't, whose children fidgeted, whose hat was new, whose family looked a little frayed at the edges. The eyes keep you in line gently and constantly. The knowledge that any slip will be seen and remembered and discussed, enforcing the standards more effectively than any rule could. So you dress the family, fill the pew, sing the hymns, and pass inspection, one more Sunday among many. That same performance of a flawless household reaches its most nerve-wracking pitch on the evening your husband brings his boss home for dinner. Sooner or later comes the evening that tests every skill you have at once. Your husband invites the boss and his wife to dinner. This is not a social occasion. This is an audition, and your husband's prospects are on the menu right beside the roast. The house must be immaculate. The children must be scrubbed and then made to vanish. The good dishes come out, and you must produce a multi-course meal that looks effortless while you quietly panic in the kitchen. Understand what is really being served, because it is not the roast. When the boss comes to dinner, the household itself is on display, and the household is understood, in the logic of the era, to be a reflection of the man who heads it. A gracious home, a lovely wife, a fine meal, well-behaved children, all of it tells the boss that your husband is stable, capable, the sort of steady family man who deserves the raise or the promotion or the trust. In other words, your performance tonight is quietly folded into your husband's career, and everyone at the table knows it, though no one would ever say it. You are not hosting a dinner, you are making his case. The preparation is a campaign waged over days. The house must be cleaned beyond even its usual high standard, every surface gleaming, every stray object hidden away, the whole place arranged to look like no ordinary human chaos has ever occurred within it. The good dishes come down from wherever they live between grand occasions. The good linens are pressed, the silver is polished. You plan the menu like a general planning a battle, choosing dishes impressive enough to signal effort but reliable enough not to betray you at the crucial moment, and you shop and cook and prepare with the stakes humming in the back of your mind. The children present their own delicate problem. They must be scrubbed and dressed and produced briefly, as evidence of your fine mothering, polite and charming for exactly as long as it takes to make a good impression, and then they must vanish, whisked away, and settled elsewhere so the adults can dine in peace. Orchestrating this, the appearance and the disappearance, timing it so no toddler melts down over the soup, and no school-aged child says something mortifying about the family's real life, is a feat of stage management worthy of the theatre. You're the director of a production in which the actors are small and unpredictable and yours. Then comes the evening itself, the performance under the lights. You cook, you serve, you clear, you refill, you charm the boss's wife and laugh at the boss's jokes. You keep every course arriving hot and on time, and you do all of it while radiating the serene impression that this is simply how your household always is, effortless and gracious and warm. Meanwhile, behind the kitchen door, you're moving at a dead sprint, managing a dozen things at once, your heart going, betraying none of it when you glide back out with the next dish and a smile. It is a masterclass in grace under pressure, performed for an audience that must never suspect the pressure exists. And when it is over, when the boss and his wife have gone and your husband is glowing with the success of it, there is no applause for you, and no rest either, because the immaculate house is now a wreck of dishes, and the good silver won't wash itself. You will be in the kitchen long after everyone else has gone happily to bed, scrubbing the roasting pan that helped win your husband's advancement, a triumph credited quietly to him. You wonder, drying the last good plate, whether you might ever simply sit down of an evening, which raises the whole tender question of leisure. You may be wondering when exactly you get to relax. The answer is, in the cracks, and even then not really. Your entertainment comes woven into the work. The radio keeps you company through the chores, with its serials, music and homemaking programs, and by mid-decade a startling new arrival begins to glow in living rooms across the country, the television. When you can steal a moment, you might sit for a program, flip through a magazine, or listen to your favourite show while your hands keep busy with mending. Start with the radio, your faithful daytime companion, murmuring away in the corner of the kitchen while you work. It brings music to scrub floors to, news of the wider world you rarely see, and best of all, the programmes made expressly for women home during the day, the serial dramas that unspool their endless plots one episode at a time, the homemaking shows dispensing recipes and advice in a friendly voice. It fills the silence of the empty daytime house, offers a thread of company and story through the long solitary hours, and asks nothing of you but to keep listening while your hands stay busy. It is leisure that does not interrupt the labour, which is the only kind you're really permitted. Then, around the middle of the decade, comes the arrival that changes the very shape of the evening. The television set, glowing to life in living rooms across the country, as Canadian broadcasting takes hold and sets appear in more and more homes. It is genuine wonder. Moving pictures brought right into your front room, and it draws the family together in the evenings to sit before its flickering screen in a way nothing quite had before. The whole household gathers around it, and the shared watching becomes a new domestic ritual. The modern hearth, everyone's faces lit blue in the dark. But notice, because you will, how differently that evening sits for you than for the rest of them. Your husband settles into his chair after supper, his day of work behind him, free to give himself over fully to the paper and the programmes. The children sprawl and watch, and you, technically present, are rarely just watching, because your hands are almost always occupied with the mending or the darning or the folding, the evening's leisure quietly doubling as one more shift of quiet work. You're in the room, you're watching too, sort of, but you're also still on duty because a woman with idle hands is a thing the era simply cannot picture. That really is the heart of it. True leisure, the kind where you do nothing at all and feel no guilt about the nothing, is largely a rumour to you. You have heard it exists. You've seen men practice it, sinking into a chair and simply being unbothered, unproductive, at rest. But for you there is always something that could be done, and a lifetime of training insisting that it should be, so that even sitting to watch a programme comes bundled with a basket of socks to darn, the rest folded neatly inside the work like a coin in a cake. So you take your leisure the way you take everything else, on the run, woven into the tasks, snatched in the cracks between them, a programme half-watched over a pile of mending, a magazine flipped through while something simmers. It is not nothing, this stitched-together rest, and you are grateful for it. But you notice sometimes that your husband's evening and your evening happen in the very same room and are not remotely the same thing. Even your rare hours of ease arrive by mail order and catalogue, which brings us to the great fat book that runs so much of Canadian life. For all the new supermarkets and shops in the growing towns, a huge amount of Canadian life still arrives by mail, thanks to the mighty catalogue. The Eaton's catalogue, affectionately known as the Wish Book, is a fixture in homes across the country, especially out on the farms and in remote communities far from any real store. Within its pages you can order clothing, furniture, tools, toys, fabric, and very nearly anything else, all delivered to your door or the nearest station. understand the geography that makes the catalogue so mighty, because this is a vast and thinly settled country. For every family in a bustling town with real shops down the street, there are many more scattered across the farms and the small remote places, hours from anything resembling a proper store, where a shopping trip to the city is a rare and major expedition. For these households, the catalogue is not a convenience, it is the store, the one reliable way to buy the 100 things a family needs that the local outpost does not stock. It brings the whole marketplace to the kitchen table, no matter how far that table sits from anywhere. And what a marketplace it is, packed between those fat covers. You can order clothing for every member of the family, boots and coats and Sunday dresses, and also furniture, tools, fabric by the yard, kitchenware, toys for the children, farm supplies, very nearly anything a person could want or need. You pore over the pages and the wish book earns its affectionate name, because poring over it is half daydream, circling the coat you'd love, the new curtains, the toy that would light up a child's Christmas, imagining the household as it might be if the budget stretched a little further than it does. The ritual of it has a particular rhythm, slow and patient in a way that would baffle a modern shopper. You study the pages, make your careful choices weighed against the money, fill out the order, and send it off. And then you wait, days into weeks, for the goods to make their way to your door or to the nearest railway station for collection. When the parcel finally arrives, it is a small event, a little burst of anticipation rewarded, the ordered things unwrapped and examined and put to use. There is no instant gratification here, only the older pleasure of looking forward to something and then, at last, receiving it. For you in particular, the catalogue offers something quietly valuable, a measure of choice exercised on your own, without a shopkeeper hovering or a trip to arrange or a car to borrow. Sitting at your own table, you can consider, compare and decide shopping the entire country's goods at your own pace in your own kitchen. It is a small autonomy, a bit of control over what comes into the home, and in a life where so much is dictated and so little is freely chosen, that page-turning freedom is not nothing. And then, in the finest tradition of thrift, the wish book enjoys a humble second career once its pages are out of date. Nothing useful is ever truly wasted in this house, and a thick catalogue full of soft paper is far too valuable to simply discard. So the old one migrates, inevitably, to the outhouse, where it performs a final, practical and deeply Canadian service. From dream book to necessity, right down to the last page, waste not. All of which, the shopping and the mending and the endless management, circles back to the invisible rule book governing your entire existence, written, as ever, by everyone but you. Let's step back and look at the invisible rule book governing all of this, because you are drowning in advice, none of which you asked for. Magazines, radio programs, doctors, ministers, advertisers, and your own mother all agree on the ideal. The cheerful, tireless, endlessly supportive wife who runs a flawless home, raises perfect children, keeps herself pretty, never nags, never tires, and greets her husband each evening as though he personally hung the moon. Consider first the sheer volume of the instruction, coming at you from every direction at once. The magazines lay out the standard in glossy detail, the radio programs reinforce it, the advertisements embody it in radiant models, the minister blesses it from the pulpit, the doctor assumes it, and your own mother, who lived a version of it herself, passes it faithfully down. There is no corner of your world that is not, in some way, telling you what a good wife is and instructing you to become her. The message is everywhere, and it is remarkably consistent, a single ideal broadcast on every available channel, and you absorb it whether you consent to or not. The ideal itself is a portrait of impossible completeness. She runs a spotless home effortlessly. She cooks wonderful meals without strain. She raises well-mannered, thriving children. She keeps herself slim and pretty and pleasant to look at. She manages the money wisely. She never complains, never tires, never has a bad day that shows. And above all, she is cheerful, endlessly and genuinely cheerful. A warm and soothing presence who exists to make her husband's life easy and his home a haven. She is less a person than a service, a smooth and smiling machine for domestic comfort, and she is held up to you as the thing you ought to be. The advice literature spells it out with a bluntness that is almost comic in its one-sidedness. Have his supper ready. Keep the house tidy and the children quiet. Freshen up before he arrives so you're pleasant to come home to. Listen to him. Do not burden him with your own troubles. Remember his day was surely more demanding than yours. Make the home a place of peace where he can rest and recover from the hard world outside. The whole thing reads as a set of instructions for arranging a woman entirely around a man's comfort, and it was published and read and taken seriously as simple good sense. And running underneath every line of it is a silence so total you might miss it. Nowhere in all this mountain of guidance does anyone think to ask what you might want. Your desires, your ambitions, your fatigue, your inner life, none of it appears in the rulebook, because the rulebook is not really about you at all. You're cast as the supporting player in someone else's story, the manager and the labourer and the emotional foundation of a household whose comfort is measured entirely by the satisfaction of its other members. The role is enormous. The credit is nil. The say in how it's written is none. So you carry the rulebook around inside you, its standards installed so early and so thoroughly that its voice can be hard to tell apart from your own, judging your every effort against an ideal no living woman could actually meet. You do your genuine best to be her, the perfect wife written by strangers, and you fall short as everyone does, and you feel the shortfall as a personal failing rather than an impossible assignment. It is a heavy thing to carry, and you carry it right into the evening, into the second shift that begins precisely when everyone else's day comes to an end. The sun is down, supper is cleared, and you might imagine the day is finally ending. It is not, because now begins the shift and nobody counts. Baths for the children, hair to be dried, teeth to be brushed, stories to be read, prayers to be said, and small people to be coaxed one by one into their beds and kept there. Then the kitchen to finish, the next day's breakfast to think about, the mending, the ironing you didn't get to, the lunch to prepare for the morning launch. Begin with the bedtime campaign, which is a full military operation conducted while you're already running on empty. Several children must be bathed, which in itself is a wet, effortful production, then dried and combed, teeth brushed into their nightclothes, a story read, prayers heard, and then the long negotiation of actually getting them to stay in their beds, each one requiring a drink of water, another trip to the bathroom, one more question, a reassurance about the dark. You move from child to child, settling each in turn, and the whole slow process eats the first hour or more of an evening you had foolishly hoped might be yours. With the children finally down and the house gone quiet, you might think the work is done, but the kitchen is waiting and the kitchen is unforgiving. There are the supper dishes to wash and dry and put away, the pots scrubbed, the counters wiped, the floor swept of the day's crumbs, and even as you finish, your mind is already running ahead to tomorrow, because tomorrow's breakfast must be planned, and tomorrow's lunches thought through, and the small preparations made tonight that will let you launch the family on schedule at dawn. The day's end is really just the setup for the next day's beginning. Then there is the backlog, the tasks that got pushed aside during the day's chaos and now come due in the quiet hours. The mending basket sits there full of tears and missing buttons. The ironing you didn't finish waits for attention. There is always some chore that the busy daylight hours could not accommodate, saved for the evening because the evening is the only slack left in a day with no slack in it, so that your rest hours quietly fill up with the work that the work hours couldn't hold. The labour does not end. It merely relocates to whenever there is a body still awake to do it. Meanwhile, cast a glance across the room at how your husband is spending this same evening, because the contrast tells the whole story. He has settled into his chair with the newspaper and the television, his workday concluded hours ago at the office door, free now to rest, to be entertained, to do nothing at all with a clear conscience. His evening is leisure. Your evening is the second shift, a whole additional workday stacked on top of the first, invisible and uncounted, performed while he relaxes 10 feet away. You're both home, in the same house, at the same hour, living entirely different nights. And so you move quietly through the darkening house, finishing the last tasks, turning off the lights room by room, the last one awake just as you were the first one up. This is the shape of your day at both its ends. You open it in the cold dark before anyone stirs, and you close it in the quiet dark after everyone sleeps, the bookends of a labour that never quite stops. You climb at last into bed, bone-tired, knowing the baby may wake and the whole thing begins again in a few short hours. And in that last wakeful moment, sometimes, a small and dangerous question drifts up through the exhaustion. And so, we come to the end of the day, and to the question humming underneath all of it. Because here you are, in the house you were promised would make you happy, surrounded by the appliances and the children and the tidy suburban dream, and yet some women, more than anyone admitted, lay awake wondering if this was truly all there was. Perhaps you had an education you never got to use, ambitions politely set aside, a mind hungry for something the kitchen couldn't feed. Sit with the strangeness of it for a moment, the way the discontent coexists with genuine good fortune. You're not starving, not cold, not in any obvious danger. You have a decent house, a steady husband, healthy children, the very comforts your own mother and grandmother could only have dreamed of, and a whole society assuring you that this is the happy ending, the reward, the thing all women are supposed to want, and still, in the quiet, a part of you feels unaccountably restless, unfed, as though something essential has been left out of a life that has everything it is supposed to have. The trouble is not that the dream failed, it is that the dream came true and turned out to be smaller than you were. Think of what many of you set aside to arrive here. Some had real educations, quick and capable minds that shone in school, ambitions to be something, to do work in the world, to use a talent that had nothing to do with a kitchen. And then came marriage and children, as everyone knew it would, and the custom of the era that a wife's place was firmly at home, and the ambitions were folded up and put away quietly without drama, because that was simply what you did. The mind did not stop being hungry just because it was told to be full. It only stopped being fed, and the doors out were, for now, mostly closed. To take real work once married was discouraged, read as a sign that your husband could not provide, a small public shame. Independence of money, of movement, of choice was hard to come by in a world arranged around the man's paycheck and the woman's home. The paths a restless, capable woman might have taken toward a larger life were narrow and few and lined with disapproval, so that even wanting more could feel like a fault, an ingratitude, a failure to be the contented wife the rulebook demanded. The wanting had nowhere to go, and so it turned inward and became that quiet ache in the dark. But here is the thing about that ache, the reason it matters beyond your own sleepless night. You're not the only one feeling it. in houses up and down your street, across your town, across the whole country, other women are lying awake with the very same unnameable restlessness, each believing herself alone in it, each keeping it politely to herself. It is spreading kitchen to kitchen, a shared and silent question gathering weight, and though no one is saying it out loud yet, the not saying will not last forever. In the years to come, women will begin to speak it plainly, and that plain speaking will change everything. But that is a story for another night. For now, tonight, you simply let the question drift where it will. You pull the quilt up against the cold, and you listen to the furnace tick in the basement, and you feel the house settle around you, all of them asleep because of the work of your hands, the work that will begin again before the sun. And with that thought, more tender than bitter, you finally let your eyes close, one weary, remarkable woman among millions, sinking at last into the dark. So there it is, one single day in the life of a 1950s Canadian housewife, and you survived it, barely. You woke in the cold dark to a crying baby and a floor that bit your feet. You girdled and pinned and painted yourself into a lady, then scrubbed a floor on your knees. You cooked a hot breakfast, launched a husband, herded a small army of children into snowsuits, wrestled a wringer washer, hung laundry that froze into boards, ironed a mountain of shirts, and stretched a thin budget across 1,000 meals. You fed a coal furnace, kept your voice low on a party line, minded your figure and your nerves, raised the children by the book, and greeted everyone with a smile you had every right to withhold. And you did it all again the next day, and the day after that, for years, without pay, without applause, and mostly without rest. It is easy to laugh at the jellied salads and the pearls and the girdles, and we did gently. But underneath the comedy is something that deserves a quiet bow. The sheer, stubborn resilience of the women who held those households together with grit, thrift, and a great deal of love, and who quietly in the dark began to imagine something more. So tonight, as you settle into your warm bed, with your thermostat and your washing machine and your own money in your own name, maybe whisper a small thank you to those women, the ones who scrubbed and stretched and endured, who kept the fire lit and the family fed, and who cracked open the door that later generations would walk right through. Rest easy. You have earned it. And so, at long last had they.